Chair and distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here to this important conference. I'm gonna first say a few words about Iceland, then Peadar will take over with Ireland. I'm mainly gonna focus on 3 points. First, or mainly deal with the domestic policy making in Iceland. Then I'm gonna mention how Iceland differs from the other Nordic states, and in the end, try to answer the question whether domestic policy making back home has changed since the economic crash. Then Peadar deals with Ireland. So first, how Iceland differs from the other Nordic states. Iceland is not characterized by democratic corporatism like the other 4 Nordic states. In the case of Iceland, we can more likely to be able to talk about sectoral corporatism and majority rule. I'm gonna come back to this important point in a second. Secondly, Iceland is not either characterized by the culture of political consensus, like is the case, or I would say, in the other 4 Nordic states. Our political culture is dominated by conflicts. And just to take an example, the Icelandic labor market has been characterized by conflict rather than consensus. And despite less tension on the labor market in the last 2 decades, Iceland continues to have the highest level of strikes amongst the OECD countries. The Icelandic policy making is very centralized. We have we have strong position of political parties. The primary economic sectors are very influential, and so are the rural regions. And we see a considerable emphasis on political favorism rather than general policy making. Iceland does have a similar welfare state as the other Nordic states. However, our welfare state is not as generous as the others. That to say, our social security benefits are not as generous, or the part that Torben called the social safety net, though we have a similar kind of health system, educational system like the others. And then the fourth and final point concerning the party system. Our party system differs widely from the others. In Iceland, the center-right have dominated politics. Our far the biggest and most influential party being the Conservative Independence Party. And the second most important party has been the Center Agrarian Progressive Party. So, on domestic policy making. The primary economic sectors are very influential, and the government's relationship with them is characterized by sectoral corporatism. So the government has worked closely with the fish industry, and then on another level it works closely with the farmers. I would even describe the decision making in on these 2 levels, or the sectoral corporatism, as some kind of self-regulating or self-regulations, because these important sectors have basically been involved in self-regulations. And we see a number of studies showing that laws are simply made or written within their institutions. One could talk about, as well, they are lightly regulated. And what happened during the neoliberal era, from 1991 to 2008, that this sectoral corporatism expanded in the 2 new important sectors, those of aluminium and the financial sector. I would not though say that they became self-regulating as the others. At least they were lightly regulated, and they were in direct and very close relations with the government. There was no overall framework where the most important interests would sit together at a negotiation table and decide where to take the country or to design an economic plan or a policy. And importantly, during the neoliberal era, other sectors and domestic actors were largely excluded from the policy-making process, or kept on the sideline with only partial engagement in the process. This became the fate of the labor movement, and for instance the environmental movement and the organization of disabled. So just to take some examples. The aluminium sector and the financial sector grow enormously during this era, and as you may know, the financial sector outgrew the state's capacity to defend it, and it had asset valued at over 10 times Iceland's gross domestic product when the international financial crisis hit the country in the autumn of 2008. So has anything changed? Not much. However, we do have the first of ever left of center government. We have a new coalition government back home consisting of the Social Democratic Party and the Left Green Alliance. So, somewhat of a historical change, the first of ever left-centre majority in Parliament. However, the political discourse is still characterized by conflicts, and there is even less tendency to focus on social partnership or corporatism, since the fisheries, agriculture, aluminium and the financial sectors, all these sectors in a way oppose the new or the present government, which they look at as a threat to their self-regulating or lightly regulated sector. The heated debates in our parliament, Alþingi, and in the society at large on a number of issues since the crash, such as the EU application, IM assistance, the process of amending the constitution, rescue package for households and businesses, and the famous Icesave issue. All these debates indicate a culture of conflict, and that the strong nationalistic discourse still dominates Icelandic politics. And again, there is no official stable framework to be found where bargaining on economic and social issues can take place. There is no comprehensive framework where consensus can be reached between competing interests. And furthermore, to end, when privileged interests feel threatened, for example by the creation of the first ever left-of-centre government, their initial reaction is publicly to berate the government's policies. And that's the situation right now in Reykjavik. Peadar, would you like to take over now?
Thank you very much, Baldur. Now I'll take over, but I'll just preface what I have to say about some reflections on the Irish model in the light of Iceland and where we are now, by saying that I think it is very important to just remind ourselves what's at the heart of our deliberations today. It is the way in which state and market relate to one another, and we've been looking at different ways in which that's done, very much influenced of course by history, by political structures, political parties, but also by something that I tried to raise this morning and I think is really a very important part of the issue for us in Ireland, which is the structure of the economy. And that, I think, is a big issue that molds the model as we have it in Ireland, and that's what I want to draw attention to here. Now, the similarities, I suppose, are obvious to all of us listening to Baldur, and I've just come back from a week in Iceland, and the more I go there, the more I'm struck by just how similar we are. I mean, unfortunately, Ireland and Iceland had no recognition of one another for centuries, really. And this crisis has begun to bring us together, and that's very good, I think, because we have a lot to offer one another, particularly at the level of civil society. But, I mean, particularly since the early 1990s, both our societies went through a very strong neoliberal reform under the dominance of a particular party. We have a party system which has been dominated by parties, two parties that really look, the more I get to know the Independence Party in Iceland, the more similar it seems to me to be to Fianna Fáil. A very strongly nationalist party, very hegemonic within the party system, and a right of centre party. And then a political culture that really is also very similar. It's a very personalist political culture, very non-ideological, and even though Baldur's point about conflict as against consensus that does distinguish us, it doesn't take away, I think, from the fact that ideology doesn't play a large role, except to the extent to which we will talk about nationalism as an ideology. But if we do, then of course that also plays a crucial role in Irish public debate and in Irish political ideology. But there are a number of strong differences that mean, at the end of the day, I think that the model is quite different, and that's why I say it does, in my view, come back very much to the structure of the economy. And it's in the nature of corporatism that we see this, and Baldur has outlined the nature of sectoral or segmented corporatism in the Icelandic case. So it's obviously narrow and it's very focused upon certain productive sectors. The corporatism that grew up in Ireland since 1987 was, of course, particularly since 1994, when the community and voluntary sector came in, much, much broader, much more all-encompassing. And in principle, now that we have an environmental pillar in social partnership, you know, it does still exist, formally speaking, it has become even broader. But of course, in practice, the actual role of the state in its relationship with the most important productive sectors of the Irish economy, which are foreign-owned, is even less than the role of the state in the Icelandic case. Now, the outcomes are quite similar in the sense that we both have states that are extremely deferential to the dominant productive sectors of the economy and effectively operate according to their needs as distinct from the needs of any overarching public interest. But I am drawing attention to fundamental differences that I do think account for two crucial outcomes. And one is a culture of consensus in the Irish case. So we have within this broad church of our corporatist arrangements had a rather stultifying consensus, it would seem to me, a consensus that really meant that any dissident voices were not taken seriously. If they had been, then we mightn't be in the mess we're in. That's obviously different in a culture like the Icelandic culture, where you have a lot of strikes and where you have, around issues of nationalism, really very, very strong and heated debates and differences. And I think that this accounts also for the failure of the Irish system to develop a welfare state that has any coherence to it. And that distinguishes us from Iceland. The Icelandic welfare state may not be as generous as other Nordic welfare states, but it's a much more coherent welfare state than the Irish welfare state, which has grown up, of course, piecemeal and has never reformed itself to give itself a central logic. And I think, again, this reflects this stultifying, narrow consensus in which we haven't had really robust debates about anything, about any reform of any public sector in the Irish state. And that, of course, I think is most marked, and it has its largest consequences when we look at the welfare state. So I just end off by making a few comments that surprised me, I must say, that I learned in my last visit to Iceland, where, I mean, following on from what Robin had said, the model that has entered into crisis is unfortunately remarkably resilient in both these cases. I visited the Alþingi for the first time, the Icelandic Parliament, this day last week, and I sat through two speakers. Now, one of the members of Parliament who I'd met at dinner the night before saw me, and she waved at me, and she came up to explain to me who was speaking, because of course it's all in Icelandic and I didn't understand it. And the two people who were speaking, one of them was the Minister of Banking at the height of the banking crisis, still a member of Parliament. The other was the main advisor to the former Prime Minister and Governor of the Central Bank at the height of the banking crisis, now a Member of Parliament. I had to point out to my Icelandic hosts that you could sit in the Dáil and there are no senior ministers who had responsibility over banks or finance. Now our Prime Minister is now sitting in the Dáil. We've had more of a break with the past, it seems to me. And talking to people and getting a flavour for where things are at in Iceland, it does seem to me that even though I totally agree with what Robin has said, I'm not trying to suggest we're moving towards a new model, but I think we've had more of a break with the past. I think there's a more lively debate in Ireland about issues, and today's seminar attests to that. And of course, you know, all of us have participated in discussions in many parts of the country where there is a live debate among ordinary people to debate fundamental things about values and about structures and the role of our state and the nature of civil society. That doesn't seem to be happening to the same extent in Iceland. So there is a certain shift to the left in discourse that seems more marked in Ireland. All that points up is, I think, the greater possibilities that exist here. If any of you have opened today's Irish Times, there's a wonderful photograph of a big march in Spain yesterday where they led with a huge banner. I thought to myself as I saw it, they must have heard that we were having our seminar today. It says, "Cambio de modelo ya." Now the word ya in Spanish of course means we want a change of model, but we want it now. You know, let's not delay. Ya, now. So I end off with that. We need a cambio de modelo. We need it now. We need it exactly now, and that's the importance of this sort of initiative. All I can say is that I hope this is the beginnings of an ongoing debate, and I commend the 3 ambassadors from the Nordic countries. It's a pity we don't have an embassy from Sweden still here, and the next time we must get the Icelandic embassy in London to get involved. But this is a very important debate. We've only touched the surface today. There are many, many more fundamental issues, and I hope we'll move into those in the future. Because I think there are great possibilities in Ireland. There's a great space that needs filling, and there's an urgent need for those of us who do see the importance of raising these fundamental questions about models to really push at this big time. We now have more left-wing deputies in our Dáil than ever. We now have more of a left-wing discourse. We have a wonderful new left-wing president. And you know, there's an opening for us to really begin to address these issues and to move decisively. Cambio de modelo ya. Gracias.